Namaskara, hello everyone. I am Akankshya welcoming all of you to today's episode of Press Corner. I'm absolutely delighted, honored, and privileged to have gotten this opportunity to sit beside one of the most versatile and finest writers out there, Professor Madhav Das Nalapat. Professor Nalapat is India's first professor in geopolitics and UNESCO Peace Chair at Manipal Academy of Higher Education. Welcome, sir, to the Press Corner.
Thank you so much.
To have come across a personality such immense like you, it's been a great honor, and we heartily welcome you to the show.
Thank you very much indeed.
Three important works about the 75 years of journey of India were published recently. One by Sanjay Baru, the other one by Pranav Vardhan, and the most important one, Journey of a Nation 75 Years of Indian Foreign Policy by Professor Nalapat. Before we start with the conversation with Professor Nalapat, let's have a look at a review video about the book.
M D Nalapat's book, 75 Years of Indian Foreign Policy, War, Peace and a World Realigned, is riveting, erudite, and provocative. He does not shy away from candor and unequivocalness. In early 2020, COVID 19 ravaged the globe, affecting every single nation and its population. In 2021, the Taliban took over Afghanistan even as the US troops made a hasty exit. In 2022, Russia invaded Ukraine, leading to a severe political and economic backlash. In recent years, such transformational events have disrupted the world order and brought to the limelight the interplay of dynamics between nations. The global scene is characterized by changes that often erupt with very little warning and which require major adjustments in outlook and policy. The world has to be studied in terms of what it is, rather than what it should have been or would be, were conditions to remain unchanged or ideal. As a potential superpower, India's foreign policy framework requires a foundation built on an admixture of present-day realities as well as long-term trend lines. It requires resilience and flexibility, so as to overcome geopolitical storms and strategic setbacks, not to mention taking advantage of opportunities. 75 Years of Indian Foreign Policy, a part of the series Journey of a Nation, describes such a framework for Indian foreign policy, even as it traces past decisions and errors that have had a lasting impact on the nation and its relations with neighbors and global superpowers. The 8 chapters critically address the complexities of foreign policy and diplomacy of the major powers, the United States of America, the People's Republic of China, the European Union, India, and Russia. Further, it charts a path for the future of the nation and forecasts the potential impacts of decisions made today. A must read for those in policy circles as well as anyone interested in the place of the nation in the emerging world order. 3 decades ago, the United Nations would have found a prominent place in the book. Today, it is no longer taken seriously due to incidences like the time when President George Bush chose to attack Iraq, bypassing the United Nations Security Council's issue. Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru was a great man, but not a great foreign minister. Nalapat is rightly unsparing of Nehru's indefensible mishandling of our policy regarding Kashmir and China. Nalapat does not only ask questions, he provides answers. This is a lucidly written book that is very timely. Nalapat's sound judgment and well-done songs stand out. The range and value of this book cannot be exaggerated.
As you chronicle India's foreign policy journey, what are the incidents that can be considered as the milestone of the journey?
Well, actually, it's important not only to consider the incidents that took place, but the incidents that did not take place in terms of lost opportunities. And I think what I've tried to chronicle is not so much all the wonderful things that happened, but all the wonderful things that could have happened if we had not missed out on the opportunities to have them. So, from that point of view, sometimes the road not traveled is more important than the road traveled.
So, in the book, you seem to be extremely critical about Nehru, who is otherwise described as the father of India's foreign policy. Could you please comment on that?
Well, I'd like to say that I'm a great admirer of Motilal Nehru because Motilal Nehru saw to it that his children, specifically Jawaharlal, came up in life, and he did everything he could as a father to ensure that his son Jawaharlal came up in life. Now, You have, for example, very saintly people like Mahatma Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi, his eldest son died as a beggar on the streets. The other children have all had, if I may say so, compared to Nehru, very inconspicuous careers. So, but at the same time, Mahatma Ji is the father of the nation. Uh, Looking at it from that point of view, I'd only like to say that I have the highest regard for Motilal Nehru because of the way in which he could ensure that his son Jawaharlal was given every opportunity to display his talents, to lead the country, and in that I would say that Motilal had no parallel in India of that period.
The non-aligned movement has always been considered as the India's major strength when it comes to foreign policy. So, do you believe in this?
Well, the fact of the matter is that it's very difficult to be non-aligned. If you're talking theoretically of being non-aligned, it means having an equal bias or lack of bias about two individuals in different situations. Whatever the situation, there is always a bias in favor of one individual or the other, one ideology or the other, and therefore I think to say non-aligned would really be, in a sense, unreal, because even a so-called non-aligned posture, it could imply an alignment, and sometimes an alignment may mean a kind of a balance, a maintaining of a balance. In other words, promotion of genuine non-alignment. So I think the entire concept of non-alignment, alignment, I think it depends on the context in which we use it. So very often we use the word non-alignment and actually mean aligned, and we use the word aligned and we actually mean the balance of genuine non-alignment.
So, if not the non-aligned movement, how do you look at India's performance with multi-alignment or issue-based alignments?
Well, I'd like to say that what's important for all of us is that we have a situation in which the citizens of our country do not go to bed hungry. They have adequate housing, they have health care, they have a good education, the best education, frankly, that is available in this particular time. And when we look at all that, I mean, we look at the fact that education, a compulsory education, ensuring that everybody was educated, everybody was literate, it was not really the kind of priority it ought to have been. It ought to have been a much bigger priority. When you look in terms of rates of growth, uh, in 1980, for example, the Chinese economy was lower than the Indian economy. By the year 2000, it was 4.5 times bigger than the Indian economy. So the question is one of the opportunity lost, if I may say so. So yes, there have been people who have, in a sense, said that I have departed from the normal version of looking at Indian foreign policy and the Indian choices that were made as one long succession of triumphs after the other. But at the end of that process, we are still not a member of the UN Security Council. We are still on the outside looking in. We are, and when we had a terrible conflict in our borders in 1962, only one country supported us, that was Bhutan. No other country supported us. We were a non-aligned country, we were friendly with all the countries, we kind of led the non-aligned movement in a sense, but at the end of the day, when we were in trouble, nobody except Bhutan came to our assistance. In my opinion, the question of how successful you are as an individual, when you're really in trouble, how many people come to your help? Because that is the acid test. Not when things are moving normally. I mean, everybody can be friendly at that time. When things are moving abnormally, when you're facing a challenge, who stands on your side? And if you look at 62, almost nobody stood on our side.
So, do you think it is India who lags behind maintaining the relationship, or it's the other countries who do not come forward?
I don't think it can be said the fault of India or so, because after all, let's be honest, there were constraints on India, and certain things that India did, specifically, for example, Jawaharlal Nehru did, were admirable. He for example, was completely opposed to Western colonialism. And he fought very hard for the independence of countries in Africa, for example, in Asia. And following on his daughter Indira Gandhi, she stood by the independence of the people of Vietnam when the Americans unwisely stepped into the shoes of the colonial French. And they became, in a sense, an occupying power in Vietnam. Indira Gandhi fought that. That was something very admirable. So you have very admirable aspects of Indian policy. There's no question about that. But I must confess that in the book I put a, if I may say so, almost invisible emphasis on economic development, economic growth, and welfare as defined by economic metrics. You can define welfare in terms of cosmic values. Let's say that you don't have much economic welfare, but you have a tremendous sense of the universe, cosmic values. A sannyasi, for example, he goes to the Himalayas and meditates without any kind of really good sustenance. And that person considers himself to be a very rich individual, rich in that spiritual essence. I have looked at a slightly more everyday thing, which is the material wants of our people. And you have to ask yourself the question, today, after all the progress that we made in 75 years, there are still nearly 200 million people whose living standards are not of the best. And I think if you ask me that way, my generation certainly, I'm not happy with the success of my generation in ensuring that the 200 million becomes, say, 200,000, or even ideally, 20,000 or zero.
So, one of the primary aims of India's foreign policy in the beginning was the campaign against colonization, right?
Yes.
So, but somewhere it looked like India succeeded in that, but the domination of the West in the geopolitical arena has still remained at large. What is the major reason behind this?
Well, I'd like to say that it's important that we don't have these very broad aggregates of the West.
Or do you think the comparison only should not be made between?
No, Akankshya, may I say that if you go, on some of my visits to the United States, I've gone to some localities where you can almost find everybody who's from the Indian subcontinent, and especially from India, the Republic of India. Either they're Indian Americans, in the sense of citizens of America, but who are Indian origin, or they're Indian citizens. So the fact is, we have now nearly 5 million Indian origin individuals who are citizens of the United States. Another 700,000 are resident in the United States in various fields. So then, are we not there in the West? Is the West not there in India? You have, for example, so many cultural attributes of the West in India. You have so many attributes of India in the West. So today, if I may say so, we have to look at the world as a kind of a fusion of cultures, a fusion of technologies, a fusion of mind space. So I think this segregation into West, East, North, South, given the patterns of migration, given the increasing ease of travel, and COVID knocked that a little bit, but hopefully we'll get it back. But I think it's important, therefore, that these categories, we are a little cautious when we keep dividing humanity in terms of these categories.
So coming to Russia, earlier USSR and now Russia, is it friends or foes with India currently?
Actually, if I may say so, the Russian people are a people who are very devoted to their friends. As a people, they are very admirable. They may not have had the best governments in the world, and you have a problem in the sense sometimes you've got outstanding people and you don't have an outstanding government, and that has a problem. But the reality is that in the first, what I call Cold War 1.0 and Cold War 2.0, now I'm happy to say that almost everybody is using that phrase of Cold War 2.0. The fact is, it was the US and the USSR that were fighting each other. In other words, what we call Russia. In Cold War 2.0, it's China and I wouldn't say the United States as such, but if I may say so, the democracies that are fighting each other. And that's Cold War 2.0. So Russia has been a friend of India for a very long time. And that's why, for example, in my case, I was opposed to our buying S-400. I didn't want us to be dependent on Russian defense systems, but I wanted us to have more trade with Russia. So I welcomed the purchase of oil from Russia. I welcome the purchase of materials from Russia in increasing volume. The more oil we buy from Russia at a discounted price, the better. And friendship with Russia is very important. Why? Especially today, because today the challenge, even to the West, is no longer Russia, it's China. The main geopolitical center of gravity is no longer the Atlantic, it's the Indo-Pacific. So when this exaggerated focus on Russia, this exaggerated playing up of Europe, even the 21st century, it detracts from the real issue, which is the challenge posed by China and the fact that today it's not the Atlantic, it's the Indo-Pacific that is the main geopolitical pivot of the times.
So, do you think India should go with Russia, or New Delhi is capable enough to make Moscow follow it?
Well, I don't think that, frankly, that any country, however big or small, should follow any other country, however big or small. We should look after our own interests. Now, my point was in the book. Again, there are some idealists who were not very happy with that. I would like to think that I respect idealists, and I would like to have a world where ideals rule. Unfortunately, we are not in that world today. And if I were to analyze an imaginary world, this would be a book about an imaginary situation.
Are we in a country today, an idealistic country?
We are in a country today that has got extraordinary opportunity. When we talk of Cold War 1.2, the main beneficiaries of that were the people of China. About 800 million were lifted out of poverty. Why? Because the leadership of China, Deng Xiaoping, even Mao, beginning with Mao, then Deng Xiaoping following on, they took advantage of Cold War 1.2 to position themselves in such a way that they got the maximum benefit from that Cold War. The Soviet Union disintegrated. The Chinese got the maximum benefit from that. Today, we are in a situation in Cold War 2.2 when the battle is between China and the big democracies, US, etc. We are in a position to get the maximum advantage from that. And that is an opportunity we should not miss. In the last 75 years, we have missed many opportunities. In the next 75 years, when your generation comes to the top and the generation after you, we should not have that kind of record.
4 important pillars of Indian foreign policy: Indira Gandhi, Narasimha Rao, Atal Bihari Vajpayee, and Narendra Modi. How would you rate these 4 administrations?
Well, first of all, the times were different. So obviously, the responses were different. And from that point of view, if you look at Indira Gandhi, she had one amazing success, which was in fact ensuring that together with the Mukti Bahini, the Indian military saved the Bangladeshi people of a horrible fate. They were subjected to the worst kind of indignities and torture in Bangladesh by the Pakistan army. But I'm sorry to say that what was won in the battlefield by the military was lost not only in terms of, in the moral sense, for example. The fact is that at least 100 or 120 officers of the Pakistan military, if not the men, in my view, men as well, should have been arraigned on grounds of genocide and war crimes. There was genocide in Bangladesh by the Pakistan military. Not a single Pakistani army officer stood trial for war crimes. All the war crimes of the Pakistan military were completely ignored by the government of India at that time. And every one of these war criminals, there must have been several thousand, at least several hundred, I mean, if you are very charitable, several tens of thousands, if you are really realistic, who have done the most unspeakable things. And what happened? All of them went back to Pakistan, went back to their families. In my view, that was a horrible mistake. Then the other mistake was Shimla. You had the opportunity of, if you wanted to settle the border on the status quo basis, the victory of the military provided you that opportunity. It was lost. We didn't insist on that. So again, as I said, when I point to some of these things out, there are people who get upset and say, because the tragedy is actually, our problem is in India, we do what Nehru wants should not happen to Mahatma Gandhi, and that is, don't deify him. Nehru said about Gandhiji, don't deify him. Don't make him into a god, into an icon. Our problem is that we either demonize our leaders or we deify them. So you have these two extremes when all of humanity is in between.
Once considered as the undivided part of the erstwhile British regime, but today India economically surpassed even the UK. In this context, how do you see the Indo-British relations, and do you think it still matters to India as a country?
Well, I'd like to say that the British took a lot from us, and I mean, we have also, they had some advantages because of the connection. One is, for example, the English language, and fortunately, unlike French or Spanish or German, it's the international link language. It's also largely the language of the information technology industry. Now, there could be a time in the future if Sanskrit becomes that language, but it's not happened. We have to accept reality as it is. English is that language. So that has given an amazing leg up. And my quarrel with the early leaders of India, they downplayed the significance of the teaching of English to the common man. The people who could not afford private school, with the result that English became a kind of a luxury good. It should have been commonly available. And people talk in terms of the Indian people not needing to know English. Well, look, you go to UP, you go to Bihar, there's such a hunger to learn English. And once they learn English, you go to the people of Bihar, the people of UP, you see them in the United States, see them anywhere, they do outstandingly. So my point is, it's the international linked language. Teaching it, making more of our people learn the language would have helped us enormously. It didn't happen. Another thing that I pointed out was passports. It was so difficult to get passports in India. Actually, I mean, your generation fortunately is not going through that problem, because by the late 80s, Rajiv Gandhi actually was the prime minister who began to make passports easy. Otherwise, it was impossible. What happened? Throughout the 1960s, there was mass immigration to Great Britain. In the 1950s, there was immigration to the United States. A large number of people from Pakistan settled in Great Britain, settled in the US, settled in other parts of Europe. Why? Because you could get passports almost on the roadside in Pakistan. In India, you could not get passport. Why? Why was it so difficult for a citizen of India to get an elementary thing like a passport? Why was everything made so difficult for the citizen? So these are some, I mean, in my view, we would have had many more Indians than Pakistanis in Britain or in the US than we have now. Of course, in the US that's changed because US immigration policy is far more sensible than the British or the continental European. But we have to understand that the British colonial law, of which we are so proud, it's colonial law. It's meant for colonial subjects. It's not British law for British people. We adopted that law. We never adapted it, which is amazing, because after 1947, 15th August, the law should have changed to reflect the fact that the people of India were free. It didn't happen. The government maintained a chokehold over the people, with the result that there are so many laws in India. Virtually every week, everyone goes through breaking 10 laws or the other. We don't even know the laws, what they are. And secondly, most horribly, the small proportion of bureaucrats who are corrupt. Most of our bureaucrats are very hardworking, wonderful people. Some of them are corrupt. It's child's play for them to use some law some regulation to get any Indian into trouble, which is a huge problem and a huge risk of, doing business in India, of being active in India, because it's so easy to get you into legal trouble using the plethora of colonial laws that are still there.
Do you have an answer to these why? Like, why didn't the passport were made accessible, or why didn't English was given more importance?
Look, I can only say that if you don't have confidence in the Indian people, then you really don't see why they should be given a leg up. If you feel, for example, you're a privileged person and you know English very well, you've studied abroad, but quote unquote, ordinary people, oh, they don't deserve that. In your heart of hearts, although you talk lovely things in the surface, in your heart of hearts, you believe these are inferior to me. They're not the same. Then why should they get a passport? Why should they learn English? Why should they have good education? Why have compulsory education, for example? Why make that a priority? And in my personal view, we are very proud of our IITs and our IIMs. Frankly, if we could attract there are talent available in the country to have 10 times more in the private sector as well. The Indian private sector in the early 1950s was one of the best in Asia. Thanks to the war, the British were forced to allow the private sector to grow to feed their own industries. And what happened to that sector? It was restricted. The commanding heights were given to the public sector, to the government sarkari sector. And as a consequence, we lost out. If you look at economic development of East Asia and look at the economic development of India, countries that were Korea was devastated, Japan was devastated in 1950. Today, where is Japan, where is Korea, and where are we in terms of per capita income?
Right.
It's improving now, definitely. There's no question about it. But look at the distance that we have to travel and the distance they have traveled. They have traveled. You see, I mean, again, some people say, you're pro-American because you say that. My point is, let's make use of America. The Chinese made use of America during Cold War 1.0. Were they pro-American? No. They were pro-communist China. I am not pro-American or pro-whatever. I am pro my country. Let's make use of it. Now, take for example the Vietnam War. We took a very principled stand, of course, an anti-colonial stand, and I think it's true. But along with that, was it possible to also ensure that we could sell equipment and other things to whoever was fighting in Vietnam? A lot of the tigers, the so-called Southeast Asian tiger economies, they grew because of the Vietnam War and the huge amount of sourcing done by the United States in that war from these countries. So while supporting Vietnam, I mean, the fact that colonialism should be abolished from there, and there's no point in a foreign occupation force, whether Russian or American, coming somewhere, we could have also benefited from that war, like so many Southeast Asian countries benefited. Now, this is seen as something, I'm suggesting something horrible, something immoral. I don't think providing jobs to my people is immoral. I don't think raising incomes of people in the poor who are poor and trying to make them middle class is immoral.
Definitely.
Morality and immorality cannot be just vague concepts. And there is a horrible lack of morality in permitting a situation to go on in which people continue to starve, continue to beg in the streets, continue to have very poor housing, continue to have bad health care. That is, in my view, the worst kind of immorality.
So, coming back to Asia, specifically in the Modi regime, the situation has improved with Tokyo as well. Do you think Indo-Japan can be a real socio-political, economic, as well as cultural model?
Look, I'd like to say that Narendra Modi comes from the state of Gujarat. Gujaratis are very practical people. I have studied him as chief minister. He's a very practical chap. And frankly, even though the United States government, I think it was Bush and then Obama, they tried to they restricted him from coming to the United States as chief minister. It was their loss, frankly. Almost the first country he visited, in a sense, the major visit was the United States. Why? Because Narendra Modi understands that in the era of Cold War 2.0, India and United States relations are very important. So he forgot all the nasty things that had been done to him. He didn't carry a grudge. He went to the US. And whether it was Obama, Trump, or now Biden, he's got a very good relationship with them. The relationship is because of the importance of these two countries. And I say very clearly, India is the indispensable partner for the United States in the Indo-Pacific. We do not want an Indo-Pacific dominated by China. Well, we will get that unless we and the United States work together. And if an American says that, and he's called, oh, you're too pro-India. And if an Indian says that, and you say you're too pro-American, it doesn't matter, because the fact is, we have got to ensure that the Indo-Pacific is free and open as it has been destined to be. It should not come under the hegemony of any power. India fought against a unipolar world led by the United States correctly. Now, we are opposing under PM Modi a unipolar world led by China. And I think if you oppose one unipolarity, you oppose the other. If something is, if cyanide is poison in a copper dish, it's also poison in a ceramic dish.
Yeah, so my next question is also linked that India seems to have found new friends in Europe, Germany, and France. So do you believe in this and agree for this also?
Well, I'd like to say that the main reason for that is the growth of India since Narasimha Rao took over as Prime Minister and the increase in the rate of growth of India. When India was growing at 1.5–2%, nobody bothered about it. Although India was a very idealistic country and huge conferences were held, nobody bothered about it. The fact is, let's be honest, this is a material world. In a material world, material progress is respected. When Indians were regarded as basically, not very successful, there was one view of Indians. Today, when you go across the world, you'll see the Indian diaspora among the most successful of any of the diasporas there. In America, in the UK, in Germany, in France, in any country, the Indian diaspora is right on top. So world perceptions of India have changed. And the point some of us were making is, if Indians as individuals can do so well abroad, why can't they do at least as well, if not much better, in their home country of India?
Right. So Trump and Modi enjoyed a very cordial relationship, and the similar was with Clinton and Rao as well. Do you think that the exit of Trump will make an impact on New Delhi's relationship with Washington in the long run?
I don't believe so. In fact, I was quite clear first that Biden is going to come because Trump had overstayed his presidential welcome. And secondly, that no matter what any individual's personal views of India were, and Joe Biden, as far as I know, I don't think the chap ever visited India, whereas he visited Pakistan many times. Joe Biden is, now he's giving some money to Pakistan to buy F-16s. I don't know how many people can be fed from the parts of an F-16, not too many. But Biden has been fixated on that for the last 40 years of his life, helping the Pakistan military. So when in 40 years you've done something, it's difficult to change. I don't blame him. But the reality is, any American president understands India is the indispensable partner in the Indo-Pacific to keep a free and open Indo-Pacific. So even if somebody like Biden, who was to abuse the Indian leadership when he was out of power, the first week after he came to power, he changed his tune because he understood that reality. India, whatever your personal views about the United States or whatever, the reality is these two biggest democracies in the world need to work together to secure the Indo-Pacific. And for that reason, whoever comes as president, believe me, Prime Minister Modi will have a good relationship with that person.
So you don't think that the relationship with Pakistan will affect India in any sense?
The sad reality is, when we talk of Pakistan, we're talking of the Pakistan military.
Right.
The Pakistan military is Pakistan according to our way of
Most of,
thinking.
yeah.
The fact is the Pakistan military is only in a single province, Punjab. That too a single part of a province, Potiawar. It's basically not even a Punjabi military, it's a Potiawari military. And that's a military which is the biggest enemy of the Pakistan state. I have always said that partition was a tragedy. And the biggest sufferers of partition were the Muslim community of India. I mean, Abraham Lincoln. Why do I respect Lincoln? Because Lincoln was a man of peace who fought a war to keep his country united. There's a sadness inside me that our leaders did not fight harder to keep India united, that they agreed to partition in the manner they did. If you look at the example of the United States, why is it a superpower today? If it had been separated into southern states and northern states, would it have been a superpower? May not, because that northern southern may become even more separate. You may finally have had 40 countries instead of 50 states, 40 countries. So I am sad that our leaders did not take the hard option of keeping India united. And they took the soft option of, okay, the British are leaving, we'll at least take over this, which is my point in the book, that sometimes the most tough option is the soft option, and the easiest and the best option is the hard option.
So now that we're talking about the Islamic countries, India's relationship with the Islamic nations has always been crucial or presented to be crucial. Maybe because we have the largest Islamic population than a number of Indians living in the Islamic countries, and not the the dominant of oil lobby and everything. So, do you have to comment on this, please?
Well, I'd like to say that I come from the state of Kerala, and Malayalis are called Malabaris in the Middle East, and they've been, I mean, in and out. Malabaris and Arabs have been moving in and out for about 1300, 1400 years. The Middle East is a second home, like for example to Tamil Nadu, Sri Lanka, Malaysia, Southeast Asia. It's a second home, So the Middle East, frankly, is very important to us. Why? And we are important to them because they have capital. We have a lot of human resources that can join with that capital and create educational hubs and technological hubs for the 21st century. Well before the first half of the 21st century, oil is going to lose its importance. The young Arabs and the Middle East is as young a country as we are in India. They need to find activity outside oil. They have to find it in the knowledge economy. India and the Middle East together can do it, which is why it's so important to have good relations in the Middle East, and why I'm happy to say the government of India under Modi has got the best of relations with the Middle East today, whether it's the GCC, whether it's in fact countries like Iran, which are not really, not in the Arab world at all. I think it's important to have that kind of relationship with the Middle East. It's a very important partner of India in the joint development of our population. Because remember one thing, let's say you want clean air. You can't have clean air only for your family or for your friends. It's got to be for everybody. The same way, we talk about, globalization is bad. But remember, in large part, unless you work for the welfare of a lot of people, you're not going to get your own welfare. So in that sense, the globalized world is inescapable.
Right. Coming to Afghanistan, do you think India has failed in Afghanistan even after the active engagements with Kabul and everything?
Well, I'm not happy about the Taliban taking control in Afghanistan. I think the United States made a big mistake in giving up Bagram and in just, throwing the Afghan army under the bus. Having said that, I'd like to say that the Afghan people, they have seen the experience of the Taliban 1996-2001. They don't want to go under the Taliban again. And whether it's the Afghan people, for example, the Pashtun people, the Pashtuns of Afghanistan, the Pashtuns of Pakistan, You take Pashtun women, they are no longer going to accept the patriarchy, overwhelming patriarchy of these fundamentalists. They are fighting hard against them. You have a lot of very brave women who are Pashtun women. You have, Levsa Bayankel, for example, who has had to go to Denmark because she was not safe in Afghanistan. But tens of thousands of women are fighting for dignity in the Pashtun community. The same is going on with the Sindhis, with the Baloch. So I'd only like to say that when we talk of Afghanistan, ultimately I think the Afghan people will go back to their more moderate roots, because initially in the 70s and 60s, Afghanistan was a moderate country. It became extremist from the 1980s onwards, when the Americans took a decision to support extremist Pashtun and not nationalist Pashtuns, because nationalist Pashtuns wanted to reclaim the Pashtun territories in Pakistan. Extremists, no. So as a consequence, the Americans took a wrong turn and supported extremism, and that's had horrible consequences across the world, including in the Muslim majority world. But that is changing now, and led by, especially for example by young people, by women, moderate the importance of a moderate mindset is becoming more and more common. I saw, for example, in Iran, that tens of thousands of young women, threw off their headscarves in protest against a lady who was beaten to death by the so-called morality police. They're the immorality police. They were the immorality police in Saudi Arabia. I saw them when I was in Saudi Arabia, and they're the immorality police in Iran today. So the fact is, the people of the world today, in the knowledge economy, the more access they get to knowledge, and that way, for example, online, the hundreds of millions of people in India have now access to internet. It's an unstoppable movement, in my view, that people will understand a world in which there is success, a world in which there is peace of mind and harmony, has to be a world aligned with modern, moderate values. So Afghanistan will also align itself, hopefully without another civil war, but if necessary, with another civil war.
Coming to the military involvement of India, do you think India's military involvement in the Sri Lankan crisis was a disaster?
See, frankly, it was a disaster to the Sri Lankan president who got India out. There was a gentleman called Ranasinghe Premadasa. I don't know on what basis he came to the conclusion that Prabhakaran is better than Rajiv Gandhi, but he wanted the Indian military out. When IPKF was fighting in Sri Lanka, IPKF did a very good job of keeping a very ferocious guerrilla army, the LTT, at bay. This gentleman was giving money and arms to Prabhakaran to fight the Indian army, Mr. Premadasa. What happened? Eventually, VP Singh came to power and said, all right, let's go. And, whatever Rajiv Gandhi did, bad, wrong. Rajiv Gandhi went to Sri Lanka, bad, go back. So he put all the troops back. And guess who was the first casualty? President Premadasa. Guess who killed him? The very individual to whom he had given weapons and arms and money in abundance, Prabhakaran. So the biggest victim of of his policy was himself. But IPKF, it was a success in Sri Lanka. We cannot define it as a failure because two politicians, Premadasa and VP Singh, joined together to pretend that the IPKF mission was a failure when it was not.
Right. Do you think the US would promote India in order to counter China, both in economical as well as political fronts?
I'd like to say the only people who can promote India are Indians themselves. And what we need to do is take advantage of the opportunities we have in science, in technology, in various other fields. India and the US already are working very closely. You look at Silicon Valley. Indian talent is so active there. Look at many of these internet companies, whether it's Google or, you look at any of these companies, they have all got Indians at the top. Microsoft, Google, the two biggest companies, have two Indians there. at the top, and Indians are everywhere. So the fact is that the good thing is that talent today is appreciated, and those countries that put boundaries in the way of talent, for example, the European Union believes that it's to have basically a criminal element from a European country is better than having a techie from Chennai. So it's easier for that criminal to enter a city in Europe, in the European Union, if he also comes from a European country, than it is for a techie who can put millions of euro in additional productivity in that country. But if you don't have that, quite frankly, I would say that in that situation, to be fair, I think the question of mobility is very, very important. And in terms of mobility, I would say India, the only country that can really make a difference to India are Indians themselves. And for that, you must have what Narendra Modi said, minimum government and maximum governance. It's a work in progress. Out of some 68,000 regulations, about 30,000 have been removed by Modi. In my view, he can easily remove another 27,000, and I hope he does it in the next 2 years or so, because you have to free the Indian from this colonial regulatory cage into which the colonial masters put us. You liberate the Indian, as an Indian is liberated in America, as an Indian is liberated in Europe, in other parts of the world. That Indian does spectacularly. Just people, I've seen in the United States, for example, successful entrepreneurs. 2 generations ago, their parents were starving in some village in Telangana or Bihar. And today, they're multi-millionaires. That is the capacity that we have as a people, as a culture. And I think liberating that capacity is the job of the government, not trying to control everything, but liberating.
So, if we are so mentally, culturally strong in our minds, there is still a dependency level, especially on the US, right? Why so?
Well, I don't, we are in the sense, we're dependent in one sense, in the sense that in today's world, you can't produce everything, you must get here and there. But remember, you're talking about the US. The US has got a huge trade deficit with India. The country that's got a huge trade surplus with India is China. So who's really taking advantage of India? It's China. It's not the US.
Right.
And I mean, but the point is, we have the capacity to produce in India. Make in India does not mean making of India, make of India. It's make in India. That's what the Prime Minister says. And that can also be foreign companies making in India. And that is where this opportunity comes in Cold War 2.0. The huge number of foreign companies looking to shift from China, more than half can come to India. That will transform the industrial landscape in India. And I think that is where we need to aim at.
So, for a very long time, we believed from Ladakh to Arunachal Pradesh, the border is lying very peacefully. But China showed it is not so peaceful as it is. Why is New Delhi hesitant in aggressively taking the border issues in general?
I think, quite frankly, if you look at the fact that we are building a lot of border infrastructure in the last 3 or 4 years, which we didn't build in the last 60 years, if you look at the fact that we have now Strike Corps, Mountain Strike Corps, if you look at the fact that India and the United States, for example, India and Japan, India and Australia, multiple military drills are happening. On the ground, we are definitely taking a posture that if there is going to be another 62, this time around, it will be in reverse. It will be the Chinese who will regret that, not us. So I think in action, we are showing it. The Prime Minister does not abuse China the way the Chinese leaders abuse other people. I think it's good that he doesn't abuse China. The point is not talking. The point is doing. And in terms of doing, I think we are doing a lot. And we can do a lot more, because I think it's almost inevitable that we are looking at a confrontation. And when that confrontation comes, we have to be ready for it. And this time around, we have to face it full on, so that it becomes the confrontation that after, for generations after, there will be no more confrontation. So I think that is a task which is difficult, but that's a task that I see happening in front of us. So I'm not really pessimistic about it.
What do you have to say about the Rohingya crisis? Like one of the major crises that the recent past witnessed in Asia, India is still struggling to get out of the Rohingya crisis.
Look, I would love to have India as a country where the hungry from all parts of the world come and settle down. I would love India to be a place where everywhere in the world, anybody who's homeless can come to my country and find a home. Unfortunately, we are not rich enough for that. So I would love to be Santa Claus to the whole world. I would like my country to be Santa Claus to the whole world. But the fact of the matter is, you remember in an aircraft you're told, put the oxygen mask first and then put on somebody else. Let's worry about our oxygen mask on our own faces. Let's breathe that oxygen deeply. And I can assure you, our hearts go out to every suffering person, whether it's from any part of the world, whether it's Rohingya, whether it is the Kurds, everywhere in the world that people are suffering, our hearts go out to it. But at the same time, our heads have got to understand we have limited capacity. And let's spend that limited capacity on putting the oxygen mask firmly on our faces and breathing that oxygen deeply, so that we don't have 180 million Indians still in dire poverty. I know this is an unpopular thing to say, and a lot of great idealists have been very unhappy about my views. But I would only like to say, I've seen beggars on the road. I've seen starving people. I've seen my people, citizens of my country in that situation. Frankly, I'm really concerned about getting rid of that first.
Right. So do you think there are plenty of opportunities for India to engage in development of Africa, which is otherwise compared with the pre-1947 India?
I would think Africa is going to be a very important country for the whole world. It's rich in resources, its people are enormously vibrant, tremendous cultures that they're rediscovering. The point is, whether it's Africa or South America, you know, the European colonizers erased their culture. In India, luckily, it was partly erased, but then we are getting it back. In Africa and Latin America, that process is coming. Africa and Latin America are both very important countries for us. And I had an idea long back about the east coast of Africa and the west coast of India. By the way, Manipal is very much on the west coast of India. We form an alliance. East Coast Africa, West Coast India, hi, come together and shake hands. And include the GCC also in that West Coast. We'll have a perfect mix of the complementary talents, because this is the world in which we have to live in a way that we make use of our complementary talents. We can't be exclusivists. We have to understand that we are all dependent on others, others are dependent on us. Ultimately, we are a horizontal world. We are different but equal. We are not a vertical world. Some are superior, some are inferior. No. Every human being has some special gift. Every human being, no matter what the income level, no matter whatever. And we must recognize that uniqueness of every human being. And I think that is a very important lesson that we need to learn in primary school itself, which regrettably is not really taught in many parts of the world.
So from the Shimla Agreement to the Lahore Declaration to failed Agra talks, did India lose more opportunities with Pakistan?
Well, look, the point is making the best use of the opportunities that we have. And the point, as you correctly said, losing. I would only like to say that I have analyzed a lot of the things that went wrong. And people have said, what's wrong with you? Aren't you proud of your country? Look, I am the guy who wrote in the late 1980s that India is going to be a superpower. I was laughed at up to 1997-98. People were laughing at me. This is the guy who said India is going to be a superpower. So please don't tell me I have no regard for my country. I do. You know, the reality of situation is, frankly, we have got a golden opportunity with us in Cold War 2.0. The Chinese used their opportunity in Cold War 1.0. Now it's our turn. It's our opportunity. And if we lose this opportunity, historians, as I wrote there, may forgive us. History will not forgive us. Historians can write anything. Historians can write that people who are failures are successes, successes are failures. History will not forgive us. This opportunity is now. And your generation and the generations that come after you, their fate is going to depend on how much we, in the next 10 years, take advantage of opportunity. That's why, young lady, I want to conclude by saying, this is a book about 75 years. Yes, it's a book about the next 10 years.
Yeah.
It's telling you what to do in the next 10 years. And that is why it's been a little critical. Because if you're a doctor, there's no point coming and saying, oh, this is very healthy, that's very healthy, this is very healthy. You have to say, oh, this part is not well.
Right.
The doctor has got to look at what's sick, isn't it?
Right.
So we have to look at what went wrong. Why? So that the next 10 years can be the transformation of India into the third superpower of the world. That is my objective. And if I may say so, the reaction to the book has been very negative, people of my age. It's been very positive, people of your age. And for me, I am delighted because we are a failed generation. You cannot be a failed generation. Our country cannot afford that.
You're still striving for it.
Good. Good luck to you.
So lastly, what do you think is the future of Indian foreign policy?
Look, first of all, dividing into foreign and domestic is a bit like, external terror, internal terror. Foreign policy, in my book, I've said it very plainly, which again has shocked a lot of people who are looking at cosmic idealism and how India should be a cosmic force. You can be a cosmic force in the cosmic world. We are not in the cosmic world. Foreign policy is an instrument of promoting the welfare of your people. Let me say that very clearly. I have looked on foreign policy as an instrument of that. Some of our leaders looked at foreign policy as an instrument of changing the world. Mao Zedong said, when he was told by Kissinger, my God, you have changed China. He said, I have only changed a few places in the vicinity of Beijing. Be realistic. You can't change the world. At least you can try and change some things in your own country. So foreign policy, in my view, is a means of ensuring that the people of India have a dignified life, so that they are strong enough to ensure that people in other parts of the world also who have been disadvantaged, they also have a dignified life. First, you make yourself strong, and then you make others strong. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for being a part of Press Corner today. It was an immense pleasure to have you today.
Thank you, Akankshya. I was delighted. God bless you.
That was a conversation with Professor Nalapat. We'll soon join with another guest at the Press Corner.